The sun was just beginning to dip behind the row of tall oak trees that lined the old neighborhood park. The place wasn't what it used to be. Years ago, families would gather there every weekend, kids playing on the swings, couples walking hand in hand, and old folks sitting on the benches swapping stories. But now the park had turned into a hangout spot for teenagers who liked trouble more than laughter. That evening, Frank Miller, a 60-year-old retired Army veteran, made his way into the park. His cane tapped against the cracked concrete path with each step, his limp slowing him down. Frank had been through hell. He had lost part of his right leg in Afghanistan, and his body carried scars far deeper than the ones anyone could see. Still, he came to the park almost every evening, not because it was beautiful, but because it was where he found peace. He would sit on the same weathered bench by the fountain, close his eyes, and listen to the water trickle. For Frank, it was a reminder that the world still had calmness left in it. But not everyone saw him that way. From the corner of the park, a group of teenagers spotted him. 5 boys, loud and restless, smoking and cursing like they owned the place. They were the kind of kids who had no respect for anyone or anything. They didn't know Frank. They didn't know the battles he had fought or the sacrifices he had made. All they saw was an old, broken man with a limp and a cane, an easy target. "Yo, look at Grandpa over there," one of them sneered, his voice carrying across the empty park. "Bet he can't even get up without that stick." The others laughed. Another one, taller with a hoodie pulled low, added, "Man, he probably comes here to cry or something. Let's mess with him." They walked over, circling Frank like hyenas around a wounded lion. Frank opened his eyes slowly. He had seen their kind before, back when he was young, before the army, when bullies thought they were untouchable. He stayed calm, his hands resting on the top of his cane. "Evening, boys," Frank said, his voice steady but low. "Evening," one mocked. "What is this, a cowboy movie?" The boy snatched Frank's hat right off his head and tossed it to the others, who laughed harder. Frank didn't move, just watched them with eyes that had seen much worse. "That's not yours," he said softly. "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do about it, old man?" The boy shot back, shoving Frank's shoulder. Frank gripped his cane tighter. His body was too worn to fight them, but his pride burned. "I earned that hat," he said, his tone sharper this time. The boys didn't care. One kicked at Frank's cane, nearly knocking him over. Another shoved him harder, and this time Frank fell back against the bench. They laughed even louder, their cruelty feeding off each other. They didn't notice the pair of eyes watching from a distance. A man had been sitting quietly in a parked car on the edge of the lot, observing everything. He was young, mid-30s, wearing plain clothes but with an aura that screamed discipline. His name was Jason Miller, Frank's only son. Nobody knew much about Jason, not even his closest relatives, because Jason didn't talk about his job. To the world, he was just away on work most of the time. The truth, Jason was a covert army operative. A spy trained to blend into shadows, gather intelligence, and when necessary, take lives without hesitation. Jason had come home only yesterday after months overseas. He hadn't even told his father yet. He wanted to surprise him that night. But when he saw the commotion in the park, his heart turned to stone. He watched as one of the boys slapped Frank's hat onto the ground, grinding his sneaker over it. Another kicked Frank's cane away completely, leaving the old man struggling to sit upright. Jason's jaw tightened. He had seen enemies torture villagers, terrorists mock the weak, men without souls laugh at pain. And now he was seeing the same kind of cruelty, only this time it was happening to his father. One of the teens pulled out his phone, recording the scene like it was some kind of comedy show. "World's saddest vet, #crippled," he shouted, while the others roared with laughter. Frank sat there, helpless, fury and humiliation boiling inside him, but he refused to beg. He refused to give them the satisfaction. Jason stepped out of the car. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost too quiet for the boys to notice at first. His shadow stretched long across the grass as he approached. He didn't look angry, didn't shout, didn't rush. But there was something in his eyes, something deadly, that made the air around him feel heavier. When the boys finally noticed him, one scoffed. What, his babysitter coming to save him? Jason stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but cold as ice. "Pick up his cane, put it back." The teens exchanged confused looks, then burst into laughter. "Or what?" the tallest one challenged. Jason took a step closer. His presence alone was suffocating. "You don't want me to answer that." Frank, still sitting on the bench, looked up at his son. His eyes widened slightly, recognizing him, but he stayed silent. The leader of the teens wasn't impressed. He puffed out his chest and got in Jason's face. "You think we're scared of some random guy? Get out of here before you end up next to Grandpa on the ground." Jason leaned in just enough so only the boy could hear him. His voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and menacing. "If you touch him again, you'll leave this park in ways you can't even imagine." The boy froze, suddenly unsure. Jason's eyes didn't carry threats, they carried promises. Promises that came from a man who had done things far worse than these teens could dream of. But pride is a dangerous thing. Instead of backing down, one of the other boys shoved Jason's shoulder. "Come on, tough guy, show us what you got." Jason's lips curved into the faintest smile. He didn't want this to escalate. He didn't want blood, but the line had been crossed. And if they didn't back down now, they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. The park went quiet for a moment, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jason stood tall, his face unreadable, while the teenagers circled him with forced laughter. But beneath their bravado, a trace of unease had already crept in. "Man, he's just bluffing," the tall one muttered, though his eyes flickered nervously. Jason didn't blink, he didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the sleeves of his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator preparing to strike. "Last chance," he said softly, pointing toward Frank's cane lying in the dirt. "Pick it up." Instead, one of the boys, the one recording with his phone, smirked and shoved Jason's shoulder harder than before. "You're in our park now, old dude. You and your crippled dad better bounce before." The sentence never finished. In a blur, Jason's hand shot out, grabbed the boy's wrist, and twisted it behind his back in a way no one could follow. The kid yelped, his phone clattering to the ground. Jason pushed him forward just enough to make him stumble, then released him like trash. "Next," Jason asked calmly, his voice ice-cold. The other boys stared wide-eyed. None of them had even seen what happened. One second their friend was laughing, the next he was on the ground clutching his arm. The tallest one tried to cover his fear with rage. "Get him," he barked, charging forward with a clenched fist. Jason stepped aside, hooked his foot behind the boy's ankle, and let gravity do the rest. The tall one slammed into the dirt face first, eating grass. Jason crouched beside him, his voice a deadly whisper. "I've broken stronger men than you for less." The boy froze, his chest heaving, dirt stuck to his cheek. Two of the others tried to rush Jason at once, fists flying, but Jason moved like water, flowing around their punches. He blocked one swing with his forearm, struck the attacker's ribs with a brutal elbow, then pivoted and swept the other off his feet in one fluid motion. Both boys were on the ground groaning before they knew what had happened. Frank watched from the bench, silent, his heart swelling with something between pride and fear. He had always known his son's work was dangerous, but he had never seen Jason in action. Now he realized why Jason never spoke about his missions, because this side of him wasn't meant for ordinary life. It belonged to a world of violence and shadows. The last boy, the smallest of the group, stood frozen in place. His bravado had vanished, his knees trembling. Jason's gaze locked onto him. "Pick up the cane." The boy scrambled, snatched Frank's cane from the ground, and placed it carefully into Frank's hands, muttering, "Sorry, sir." Jason straightened up, his presence towering over them. The boys, all 5 of them, now lay scattered around the park, bruised, humiliated, terrified. None of them laughed anymore. Their eyes darted toward Jason like prey trapped in front of a predator. "You think being tough means picking on the weak?" Jason's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You think it makes you men? Let me tell you what makes a man: standing up for something, protecting people who can't protect themselves, respecting those who have given more than you ever will. That's what you just spat on." The leader, still on the ground, tried to mumble something, but Jason crouched down and grabbed him by the hoodie, forcing his face inches away. "You ever come near him again," Jason growled, nodding toward Frank, "and you'll pray the cops get to you before I do. Do you understand me?" The boy swallowed hard, his bravado shattered. "Why, yeah, we get it." Jason let him go, standing tall again. His chest barely moved as he breathed, calm as if nothing had happened. He turned his back on them, an act more insulting than any punch. "Get out of my sight." The boys didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled to their feet, limping, stumbling, dragging each other toward the edge of the park. The one with the phone left it behind, too terrified to look back. In seconds they were gone, their laughter replaced by the sound of retreating footsteps. Silence settled again, broken only by the trickle of the fountain. Jason walked over to his father, his expression softening for the first time. He knelt down in front of Frank, who was still gripping the cane. "You all right, Dad?" Jason asked quietly. Frank looked at him for a long moment, his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "You came home." Jason smiled faintly. "I was gonna surprise you tonight. Guess the surprise came a little early." Frank chuckled weakly, shaking his head. "I knew you were strong, son, but seeing you like that, Lord, those boys didn't stand a chance." Jason's eyes darkened slightly. That's nothing compared to the things I've had to do out there, but here at home, no one touches you, ever. Frank patted his son's shoulder with a trembling hand. You're just like your mother, fierce when it comes to protecting family. Jason's jaw tightened, emotions flickering in his eyes. She'd have wanted me here more often. Frank didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Jason's work kept him away, sometimes for months, sometimes longer. It was the price he paid for serving in silence. But before either could say more, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Blue and red lights flickered against the tree line. Someone, maybe one of the teens, had called the police. Jason's calm mask returned instantly. We need to go, he said firmly. Frank frowned. Go, you didn't do anything wrong. Jason shook his head. You don't understand, Dad. I can't afford to be on record. If they take my name, my face, it could compromise everything. Missions, identities, people who depend on me staying invisible. We leave, now. Frank hesitated, torn between pride and worry, but the urgency in Jason's tone left no room for argument. Jason helped his father up, supporting him carefully as they moved toward the car at the edge of the lot. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights closer. Jason opened the passenger door for Frank, then slipped into the driver's seat. As the squad cars rolled into the park, Jason's car pulled out silently, slipping into the shadows of the streets beyond. Inside, Frank finally asked the question that had been burning in his chest. Jason, how many times have you had to be that man, the man I saw tonight? Jason kept his eyes on the road, his voice low and heavy. More times than I care to remember, but I never wanted you to see it. Frank studied his son's face in the dim glow of the dashboard. For the first time, he understood the weight Jason carried, the life he lived in secret, the scars he never showed, and he realized the fight in the park was only the beginning. Because those boys weren't done. Humiliated, bruised, and angry, they would want revenge, and people like that never chose their battles wisely. The night air was heavy with silence as Jason drove his father home. The streets were empty, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Frank leaned back in the passenger seat, cane resting on his lap, his thoughts tangled between pride and fear. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes scanning every mirror, every shadow, as if danger lurked everywhere. Frank finally spoke. You think those boys'll just forget about this? Jason shook his head slowly. No, not kids like that. Pride stings more than fists. They'll stew in it, make themselves out to be the victims, and they'll come back louder, meaner, and stupider. It's not over. He wasn't wrong. Across town, in a dimly lit basement that smelled of weed and stale beer, the 5 teens sat nursing their bruises. The leader, the tall one with the split lip, paced back and forth, seething with humiliation. We can't let that old cripple and his freak son punk us like that. Everyone's gonna laugh at us. One of the others rubbed his ribs, still aching from Jason's elbow. Man, did you see him? He wasn't normal. He moved like a movie ninja or something. We should just let it go. The leader spun on him, eyes blazing. Let it go, hell no, he made us look weak. That dude thinks he's tough. Let's see how tough he is when we roll up with more than just fists. They exchanged glances, guns, knives, whatever they could get their hands on. It wasn't about a fight anymore, it was about payback. Back at Frank's house, Jason sat by the window, the curtains drawn just enough for him to peer into the dark street. His instincts wouldn't let him rest. He had seen too many cycles of revenge overseas. This was no different, just smaller scale, but just as dangerous. Frank sat in his worn recliner, watching his son's tense posture. You're still on duty, aren't you? Even when you're home. Jason didn't turn his head. Home is where you're supposed to be safe. That makes it the most important battlefield. Frank sighed deeply. I don't want you to carry that weight here too, son. You've done enough fighting for a lifetime. Jason finally looked at him, his eyes sharp but filled with something softer underneath. I'll never stop fighting for you, Dad. Before Frank could reply, Jason's ears caught it, the faint crunch of gravel outside, too soft for a car, too staggered for a passerby, footsteps, several of them. Jason stood instantly. They're here. Frank gripped his cane tighter, fear flashing across his face. The boys. Jason nodded, already moving. Stay inside, lock the door behind me. But Frank shook his head. No, this time I stand with you. Jason paused for half a heartbeat, then placed a hand on his father's shoulder. All right, but stay behind me, no matter what. They killed the lights and waited. Outside, muffled whispers grew louder. A rock smashed through the front window, shattering glass across the floor. Laughter followed, then footsteps on the porch. Jason slipped into the shadows of the hallway, his body coiled with lethal precision. The door burst open, and the teens stormed in, armed with bats and knives. Their bravado was back, fueled by numbers and adrenaline. But they had no idea who they were up against. The first one barely cleared the doorway before Jason struck, an open palm blow to the throat that dropped him gagging to the floor. The second swung a bat, but Jason sidestepped, yanked it from his hands, and cracked it across his knees until it snapped in two. Chaos exploded, the room filled with shouts and curses as Jason moved like a shadow through them, his strikes brutal but efficient. He didn't waste energy, didn't show mercy. A twist of a wrist and a knife clattered to the ground, a knee to the gut, and another boy folded over, vomiting. Frank stood in the corner, heart pounding, watching his son dismantle the gang with terrifying skill. But when one of the teens broke away and charged toward Frank with a blade, Frank swung his cane hard, cracking it across the boy's hand. The knife dropped, clattering on the floor. Frank raised the cane again, his old soldier's spirit flaring for the first time in years. Jason caught the boy before he could recover, slamming him into the wall with such force the drywall cracked. "You should have listened," Jason growled. Within minutes the fight was over. The teens lay sprawled across the living room, groaning, coughing, clutching their wounds. Jason stood among them, chest heaving lightly, eyes blazing with controlled fury. The leader tried to crawl toward the door, but Jason grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upright. "You brought knives into my father's home. You crossed a line you can't uncross." The boy whimpered, his earlier arrogance gone. "Pete, please, we didn't mean." Jason slammed him against the wall, eyes inches from his. "Out there, where I come from, people like you don't get a second chance. But you're lucky. This is still my home, and I'm still trying to remember what mercy feels like." He dropped the boy like a sack of dirt. "Get out, all of you, and if I ever hear my father's name in your mouths again, I will not stop at mercy." The teens scrambled, dragging each other out the broken door, stumbling into the night. Their footsteps faded, leaving only silence and the smell of fear behind. Jason turned, his breathing slowing. His eyes softened as he looked at Frank, who still gripped his cane, chest heaving. "You held your ground," Jason said with the faintest smile. Frank chuckled, though it came out shaky. "Guess the old soldier's still got a swing left in him." Jason walked over, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "You've got more than that, Dad. You've got me, and as long as I'm here, no one touches you." Frank studied his son's face, the hardened lines carved by years of shadows and blood. "And who protects you, son?" Jason didn't answer right away. He looked out the broken window, the dark street beyond. His silence said everything. In his world, protection wasn't something he ever expected. He was the shield, the weapon, the shadow. Finally, he turned back, his voice quiet. "I don't need protecting, Dad. I just need you to remember me for who I was before all this, not for what I've become." Frank's throat tightened. "You're still that boy, Jason. You'll always be my son. Nothing changes that." Jason nodded faintly, letting the words settle deep in the parts of him that war hadn't yet hardened. The night passed without another sound. By dawn, the broken glass was swept away, the house patched up as best as two millers could manage. The danger was gone, but the lesson remained. Those teens would never forget what happened. They tell stories about the night they crossed the wrong man, a man who moved like death itself. And maybe, just maybe, it would stop them from ever preying on the weak again. As for Jason and Frank, they sat together on the porch as the sun rose, silent but united. A wounded veteran and his spy son, both soldiers in their own way, both scarred, both unyielding. And both knowing that, as long as they had each other, no battle was too great.